Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES for 10% off any purchase over $10. If you use that promo code between now and January 28th, you will automatically be entered in a drawing to win a Ravnica Allegiance booster box. Check out the description below for details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 3 of our 5-part Ravnica Allegiance full set review. Today we're going to look at all of the Orzhov cards and the cards in black that do not have a watermark. If you've been watching the series, you know what to expect here. We're going to look at each card individually, and this is truly a limited set review. We're going to be talking about how they can best be utilized in the draft and sealed formats. Quickly before we get started though, just a fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to support the channel. Our Patreon page is down there. You're also going to find links to products on Amazon down below. If you make any purchases on Amazon, once you go through that initial link, we'll get a small percentage for the channel. Finally, Flipside Gaming still offering a promo code for our viewers. Hopefully you can save a little cash while you support us. But as always, thank you not only to the folks that look at those links, but to all of you. All the viewers make the channel what it is. So thank you, and let's get into it. Awaken the Erstwhile. Okay, this is a rare I'm not very excited about. This is kind of starting off on a low point, but typically, in draft or sealed, rares are good. Sometimes you might not play them because they don't make sense with your deck makeup, of course. But this is a card that if I open this, I'm not going to be real excited to see it. The problem is, for this to be better for you than your opponent, you have to put a little work into it. And it's really hard to do in this draft or sealed environment. Look at it this way. Yes, tokens are going to be good for Orzhov or for Rakdos, as a matter of fact, because they both have some light aristocrats elements in there. So stuff that you can sacrifice is never a bad thing. So maybe, just because you're in this color, it's slightly better already for you than your opponent. However, if you just ditch all your cards, your opponent ditches all their cards, and you're staring at each other with a bunch of tokens, not a lot happened here for 5 mana normally. Now, you could try to manipulate this to some degree. You could hopefully have maybe some cards that interact with the graveyard, but unfortunately, there's not a lot of those in the set, especially compared to Guilds of Ravnica, for example. So you're not going to have a lot of great opportunities to do that. And I guess also you could know this is in your deck, especially for game 1, and try to play around it a little bit. Maybe hang on to extra lands or something, knowing that this might show up. So yes, you can manipulate it slightly, but not enough for me to care that much. I just feel like it's too high variance, and many times I might draw this when my opponent has more cards than I do, or I have cards that I don't want to discard. Maybe I'm trying to get my opponent to discard the cards and I don't have any cards in my hand, and that might be good, but then they have 2/2 tokens I have to deal with. Overall, I just don't really want to play this, even in the limited formats. Bankrupt in Blood. This is a good draw spell, but it does eat into your board state a little bit. 2 casting costs, draw 3 cards. That's phenomenal, but you do have to sack 2 creatures. The question is, can you make that an advantage as opposed to a disadvantage? And yes, in this color, I think you can do that. Let's talk Rakdos first with this card. Rakdos will have a lot of small creatures. They're very aggressive. As the game continues on, they may have some trouble actually doing anything once you get to maybe turn 7, 8, or 9, and they're just kind of sitting there. Well, now you can use those creatures to another benefit. Hopefully dig deeper into your deck to find your bigger plays. Also remember, when we get to red, there are some threatened effects, which will interact with many of the cards we see today. In Orzhov, you have the Afterlife mechanic. So you might have creatures that aren't doing a whole lot, but if you sacrifice them, they turn into these 1/1 flying tokens. All of a sudden, that might be better than what you had before, and you're drawing 3 cards. Yes, this might not always see play in every deck build, but I think most of the time running one of these is going to be good for you, especially in these strategies. Blade Brand. Nice little combat trick here that cantrips for 2 mana. I don't want to necessarily go crazy with these type of things, especially when there's a lot of removal in black anyway. But I could see myself playing one of these in a deck and being relatively happy with it generally. Bloodmist Infiltrator. Okay, 3/1 for 3 is not where you want to be, but if you think you'll consistently have things you want to sacrifice to this, it's definitely playable, and again, you're in the right color combinations here probably. If you're in Rakdos, you're going to be interested again in just getting rid of some of these small creatures that aren't doing anything later in the game, and then you can still push across maybe those last few points of damage. That's one of the things with a Rakdos deck. It could start off strong, but then run out of gas. A play like this is going to allow you to keep doing damage later into the game. That could be important. Also, an unblockable creature definitely will play well with Spectacle too, so you want to keep that in mind for Rakdos. Orzhov is trying to win by the death by 1,000 cut strategy. Any little bit of damage they can do, any little bit of life gain they can get is going to help with their overall strategy. So this plays into that as well, and again, of course, you have Afterlife, which could take a creature and turn it into flyers. Also, too, if you happen to kind of splash this or go off color, this gets more interesting maybe with Simic, where you could make it larger with +1/+1 counters occasionally. A larger unblockable creature is definitely better than a smaller unblockable creature. But again, I could see if I do have a build where I'm not feeling like I could consistently give up board state, then maybe I skip this card. But most of the time, I think in this set, it's going to be fine. Carry on Imp. Okay, first off, a 2/3 for 4 flyer. That's actually pretty good, just generally in limited. You need a little board presence in the air. This will do that for you. It's just fine. The ability of gaining life and being able to exile target creature from a graveyard is interesting too, for Orzhov especially. Just because I mentioned Orzhov is all about the death by 1,000 cuts. So yes, any little incremental advantage you can get in Orzhov colors will be helpful. Now, getting rid of a creature in a graveyard, maybe that's one of your creatures because hopefully you'll be sacrificing or losing some creatures that have afterlife. Or if your opponent has a creature, it does at least lower the odds that they can get it back to their hand or something like that, because there are ways to do that, or get it back into the battlefield even. We'll see that later. But like I said, that's not as big of an element in this particular set as others. So maybe that comes into play, maybe it doesn't. But still, I'm really playing this card because of the board presence and because of the small life gain for Orzhov especially. The little life gain in Rakdos isn't bad either, because both of those strategies are trying to race just in a different way. Rakdos is racing by just attacking, and if they take some crackback here or there, a little life gain doesn't hurt. Orzhov is racing in a more complicated way, where they're doing a little damage here, a little damage there, they're gaining a little life here, gaining a little there. Hopefully that life gain will keep you slightly ahead of your opponent at all times, and that's kind of the idea there. Catacomb Crocodile. This one's kind of weird in this set because it's a big creature to gum up the ground, and Black's not trying to do that as much in this set. They're trying to be a little more aggressive. So it feels like it would make sense in a control build of some kind. Maybe if you went Esper, you might want to play one of these. I don't know. But for the most part, I don't think you play this. I think if you're in Rakdos colors, you're going for the small aggressive creatures. If you're in Orzhov colors, you're really looking at anything that's going to either have afterlife or do a little bit of damage, things with death touch that get by sometimes when they shouldn't, or else perhaps ways to gain life. It doesn't really fit into strategies. Now, another reason this might be okay in Esper is because you have high alert in the Azorius colors as well. This does play at least into that strategy if you happen to go down that road. Clear the Stage. Good removal spell. It's a little expensive, but it's at instant speed. It's going to do -3/-3 to a creature, so that's going to be pretty good. Also, if you happen to control a large enough creature when you play it, then you get to take a creature card from your graveyard back to your hand. So this is one of the few ways to get something back out of your graveyard after you sacrificed it. Again, Rakdos could be interested in that. Orzhov might be more interested in it with Afterlife. You're just going to get more bang for your buck probably if you just replay an Afterlife creature. Just going to help you swarm with his 1/1 flyers, a big part of Orzhov's strategy. But at the end of the day, no matter what I'm doing, -3/-3 for 5, that could be good enough at instant speed in a lot of limited builds. Consigned to the Pit. Kind of the same story here. 6 casting costs, destroy target creature sorcery speed. It's a little slow, but it's unconditional removal. You're going to play one of these and be pretty happy with it most of the time. It also deals 2 damage to that creature's controller, which again plays into both Orzhov and Rakdos. Rakdos, especially as the game goes on, is going to have to get creative to push across the final points of damage. One other thing to consider too, the 2 damage attached here is great to turn on Spectacle for those Rakdos builds. Orzhov is always looking for any opportunity to throw damage, even if it's small. Cry of the Canarium. This sometimes will be a sideboard card, sometimes it will be a main deck card, it just depends on your deck. If you're running larger creatures generally, you could probably just main deck this, assuming that it's going to be better for you than your opponent. If your opponent happens to have a lot of graveyard interaction, which again, you might not see as much now, but then I could always side it in if I'm not main decking it. This would be good against Afterlife since it exiles the creature, which nullifies that ability. And if I'm in a situation where both my opponent and I are playing small creatures, maybe we're both on Rakdos or something like that, then I could side this in and maybe play around it a little bit, try to hold back some of my stuff while my opponent overcommits, and then when I wipe the board, I can just throw down all my aggressive creatures and pull ahead, hopefully. So that's another way to look at this. So it's not for every build, it just depends on the situation, but don't forget it's in your sideboard if you're not using it. It could come in handy. Font of Agonies. Now this would be good if you have some ways to pay life and power it up, but I'll be honest with you, there's not always going to be a lot of ways to pay life in your deck. There's things like Shockland, sure, but they're rare. If you happen to have enough ways to pay life, then wonderful, I'd play this card because I think it's actually going to be pretty good for you. But I don't know how often that's going to happen, and if it doesn't happen, you're going to have to skip this one, which is kind of sad because it is a rare. Other than the shocklands, there's a common we're going to look at later that does give you a choice to pay life, but overall, the interactions between this card and other ones in the set are pretty limited. Grotesque Demise. Really good removal spell for limited purposes. Yes, it can't hit the big bombs, but it's cheap for only 3. It's an instant. You know you're going to have a lot of smaller creatures in these formats, a lot of 2-drops, a lot of 3-drops. You're always going to have targets for this thing. And what's nice is with the exile ability, it does get around things like Afterlife. So if your opponent has a small Afterlife creature, you can get rid of it and they won't get the tokens. Gutter Bones. This is actually really good within this set. Now, it's a rare, unfortunately. I kind of wish it was uncommon maybe, or at least something similar to this would be at uncommon. Because for both Rakdos and Orzhov, you do have a lot of reasons you might want to sacrifice a creature or two. So this is kind of cool because it will sacrifice and then you're able to get it back later. It does play well into a Spectacle strategy with Rakdos, which you know they're going to be trying to push damage across any opportunity they get. But Orzhov will be too, and they do have a lot of options for just doing 1 damage sometimes. So it fits into both of those builds. It's a little slow, granted. I mean, you can only use the ability on your turn. It has to go from graveyard to hand, then you have to replay it for 1. It comes into play tapped, but that's okay. At least it only costs 1 and 2 to actually use the ability. And it's not really about the creature itself for me as much as it's about having sacrifice fodder for these other cards. Ultimately, this will be good in either of those builds. Ill-Gotten Inheritance. This is perfect for Rakdos or Orzhov. Rakdos wants to turn on Spectacle. Every one of your upkeeps, you get a chance to do a point of damage, gain a point of life, so that's going to turn on Spectacle for the turn. That's awesome. And then later in the game, when maybe your little creatures can't get across for damage anymore, you start running out of gas, you could potentially do a nice chunk of damage and gain a little life with the sacrifice ability here. So that works perfectly. Orzhov also, like I said, they want any little bit of advantage they can get. A 2-point life swing every turn fits perfectly into Orzhov's strategy. And then later on, you can do a one-time 8-point life swing too. Noxious Grudion. Okay, this is a small death touch creature. I always like those in limited, but I do prefer them to be like 2 casting cost, even if they have lower power toughness. In this case, though, most of the time I could still play one of these and be happy with it. In Rakdos, I might consider sometimes not playing it just because I want to put a lot of pressure down on my early turns, and this is a little slow. But in Orzhov, this is perfect for their strategy. They're going to really put the pressure on the opponent with all the small life hits here and there. And then, of course, you have the small creatures in the air with Afterlife. So your opponent's got tough decisions. Do they trade away a better creature sometimes with this or a more expensive creature? Or do they allow this to come in for 2 on top of all the other little damage you're already doing? It's a nice card to keep the pressure on there. Pestilent Spirits. Almost the same story here. I mean, this is just a solid card, though. Even better in Rakdos than the previous one, however. But it is a rare. It should be. This costs 3 for a 3/2 Menace Death Touch. I won't even read the next part yet. That's already got me on board. Like I said, the Death Touch Menace is going to be awesome for Orzhov to keep the pressure on. Rakdos will be able to do more damage with this consistently as well, which they're going to like. Again, we've been talking about how Death Touch is good for Orzhov because sometimes the opponent will decide not to block and take the damage. Well, that also works well with Spectacle, too. Add the Menace to this, and it's even better for that. And if an opponent wants to block it, they are typically trading 2 creatures for it. And then, oh, by the way, instants and sorcery spells you control have Death Touch. That could be very relevant from time to time, too. Maybe not all the time, but enough of the time that you'll care. So this is an awesome 3-drop rare. Great early pickup or first pick in a draft pack because it is monocolor and very powerful. Plague White. This is actually another card that's just solid in both of the strategies we've been talking about mostly today. Rakdos and Orzhov. It's cheap, a 2/1 for 2, and with that ability, it puts pressure on the opponent. They can't make a lot of profitable blocks on this with their small creatures, and that's going to be good. It will force across some early damage for either of those strategies. And again, remember, if your opponent has trouble blocking this thing, it could help with Spectacle spells. Priest of Forgotten Gods. Okay, you need a little board presence for this to be great, but if you have it, it's really, really good. A 1/2 for 2. Tap, so it's a little slow. You have to wait till it gets back to your turn to use the ability, but tap, sacrifice 2 other creatures, and look what you get here. Any number of target players each lose 2 life, sacrifice a creature, you add 2 black to your mana pool, draw a card. Wow, okay, so the biggest obstacle you have here is first off, it has to survive back to your next turn to get past the summoning sickness, but then you do have to have board presence to make this great. Like I said earlier, Rakdos will definitely have some small creatures that become obsolete. They'll have some cannon fodder. You'll see more of that as we move into red later in the week. And don't forget about those red threaten effects too. Another reason to play this in Rakdos is because it deals 2 damage if you activate it, so again, it could contribute to Spectacle, and you even ramp a little bit, which will help you cast the next spell. Orzhov is going to appreciate this with Afterlife. You just get so much of an upside here, it's great. Now granted, if you're behind and you don't have creatures when you draw this, it won't feel good, but that's the risk you take for having such a powerful card. This could be really strong at the right time. Spire Mangler, nice little combat trick here. It has flash, it's a 2/1 flyer. When this enters the battlefield, target creature with flying you control gets +2/+0. So that could be another creature, or it could be this one until end of turn. So you could really surprise your opponent by throwing this down, and it's basically a 4/1 flyer. It could block something sizable in the air, and that's pretty cool. If you wanted to get more aggressive with that ability, if you're ahead and you're trying to close the game out, you could play this on your turn. Granted, it can attack, but it does give a buff maybe to a 1/1 flying token or something like that. So it could be especially good in Orzhov, perhaps. But I do think you end up playing one of these more often than not if you have access to it in either Rakdos or Orzhov. Thirsting Shade. This is actually decent, maybe not for every build, but I like it a lot. It's a common, it only costs 1, it's a 1/1, so it's very fragile. But it has lifelink, and then it has a Shade ability, which is a black and 2. A little more expensive because it does have lifelink. So look at it this way. Maybe some Rakdos decks might not always want this, it just depends on your curve, it depends on what you have. Now, some could still include it just because later in the game you need some options that could be more flexible, and this could be one of those options for you if you don't have better things. Even the threat that this thing could be pumped could make people think differently when it attacks, and again, maybe could lead to a Spectacle activation as well from time to time. In Orzhov, though, this really shines, because even if it just comes out and dies in combat, you're gaining a life off the lifelink. Later in the game, when you can pump it, it gets better, and even if your opponent is chump blocking it for a while, you're still gaining life, and it's making them make some tough decisions. Again, that Orzhov attrition starts to come into play, and it's perfect for that type of strategy. Undercity Scavenger. This is okay. It's a 3/3 for 4. This might feel better for me in Orzhov just because a lot of times there will be something I want to sacrifice with Afterlife. If I have a small Afterlife creature, this gets 2 +1/+1 counters. I get to scry 2, which is always awesome. And I also get a 1/1 flyer maybe. If I'm lucky, 2 1/1 flyers perhaps. But for the most part, I think the economy here could be decent for you in that type of build. In Rakdos, I'm a little more shaky. I do like scrying. A 3/3 for 4 is on par for limited generally, but in Rakdos it does feel a little slow. And even though I might have an obsolete creature, which will turn this into a 5/5 and give me the scry 2, yeah, it doesn't have trample, it doesn't have evasion, it might still have trouble getting by. And I'm always worried sometimes about going taller over wide when it comes to my board presence because just one removal spell will get rid of this. So maybe some threatened effects in red might make me change my mind, but when you combine the casting cost of this as well as the cost of the other spell, it starts to feel a little too expensive anyway. Yeah, it doesn't feel great there, but in Orzhov, I definitely consider playing it. Undercity's Embrace. Here's an instant speed edict effect that maybe, later in the game especially, you have the opportunity to gain some life off of it. 4 is a pretty big chunk of life, too. Now, this is cool because sometimes edict effects are good early, but they're not as good late in the game, especially if your opponent has a lot of tokens or something like that. So this kind of nullifies that at least a little bit by making it a better late game play. As long as you have a large enough creature, then you also get the life gain. So you might play this sometimes, and really it's the life gain that you're getting more so than them losing some obsolete creature, but Orzhov's okay with that. Rakdos, I think, is okay with this too, because early on it's a good way for them to take away a blocker and just keep the pressure on. Vindictive Vampire. Alright, this is another complement to this aristocrat strategy that you could see really again in both of these color combinations we've been talking about. What's nice about this too, if you lose a creature, it will deal a point of damage, so Rakdos will have Spectacle turned on, that's pretty good. And Orzhov really likes the point swing. The 1 life loss, the 1 life gain, that's a big deal for that strategy. So again, another card that just fits in. Paying 4 for a 2/3 is not going to feel good, but with this ability, it's going to make sense in Rakdos and it's going to make sense in Orzhov. Okay, let's move on to the Orzhov watermark cards, beginning with Debtor's Transport. Alright, it's got Afterlife too, so I'm going to play it. Afterlife feels a little innocuous. It doesn't feel super flashy, right? But this is a powerful mechanic. Remember Lingering Souls is all I'm going to say about that. In Limited, when you get swarmed by a lot of 1/1 flyers, you're probably in trouble a lot of the time. So this doesn't look amazing, right? 6 casting cost, 5/3. I mean, who would play that? But you kind of want it to die. So even though it's a high casting cost spell, and I'll be honest, sometimes I won't play this card just because I'm going to have better big drops in my deck, and you can't be too top heavy. But if I don't, this is serviceable. I play this thing in an Orzhov build. I attack in with this silly 5/3. My opponent has an option. They can chump block it, lose board presence, they can take the 5, which they really don't want to do against Orzhov probably. Or they can kill it, and they might even be trading up, but now I'm getting these 2 flyers in the air. That's actually pretty awesome. So this is also a good blocker too if you need to gum up the ground a little bit, which eventually will turn into a more offensive play with these flyers. This feels a little slow in Rakdos for me, but in Orzhov I would consider this. Orzhov Enforcer. Okay, even better. This one's a cheap Death Touch creature, only costs 2 like I like, a 1/2, Afterlife 1. So the whole theory here is hopefully at some point during the game you can trade up for this because it is a Death Touch creature that's relatively cheap, and then you also get the 1/1 flyer. If you can swarm with these flyers, you're going to be having a good day, and this makes another bad decision for your opponent to make. Do they block it, lose a creature, and have to deal now with this 1/1 flyer beyond that point? Or do they just take the 1 damage? And again, taking 1 damage might be okay here or there, but very soon Orzhov is going to make you feel the pressure if everything goes right. So this is another one of those kind of death by 1,000 cuts bad decision cards. And again, in Rakdos, you do have another Death Touch creature. This one is going to give you a benefit when it dies, so it could encourage somebody to just take the 1 damage, and that's going to be good for Spectacle too. Orzhov Racketeers. Okay, here's yet another one of these cards. Again, a little expensive, and these are going to be a little expensive because the Afterlife mechanic is strong. 5 casting costs for a 3/2. Does this ever deal combat damage to a player and make them discard a card? Probably not a lot of the time, but who cares? If your opponent has to block this thing, yes, again, you might be trading down, but you get the 2 flyers. It's just part of the overall plan. All the little damage, all the little incremental life gain, and then all these little flyers show up. Your opponent eventually just gets overwhelmed. Okay, let's move on to the white cards with the Orzhov watermark. Knight of Sorrows. Again, expensive, 5 for a 3/3, but kind of the same story here. You get the Afterlife 1 off this thing. This can block an additional creature each combat, so that makes it a little easier for it to die in combat if you want to get to the point where you get the flyer in the air. Yeah, again, not for all builds, but very playable in the Orzhov build. Ministrant of Obligation. This is another great Orzhov card. This feels a little more economical at 3 for 2/1. And look at that Afterlife. This time it's Afterlife 2. That's phenomenal, right? This is going to be hard to deal with. You play this little 2/1, attack in with it. What's your opponent going to do? Keep taking 2, or do they let it die and then deal with these 2 flyers in the air later? That's a tough decision, definitely, especially when you're getting all that little incremental damage here or there. Perfect card, again, for that strategy. Now, one thing I haven't talked about too much, but we might get into it more with the gold cards, is the fact that Mardu might be a good strategy generally, just because Rakdos and Orzhov do have a lot in common. Syndicate Messenger. This is another kind of overcosted creature, it feels like at first, the 2/3 for 4, but it is flying, so that's not the worst thing in the world, and you're getting the Afterlife ability attached to it. So again, it's got evasion, it's perfect for Orzhov. This might be good in Azorius as well, because Azorius cares about flying creatures and controlling the board. So you could throw this out. It's a 2/3 flyer, control the board a little bit. If it ever dies, you can continue the pressure with another 1/1 flyer. That could be real good there. Tithe Taker. This is one of the more economically costed Afterlife cards we've seen so far, although there are some good ones coming up in the gold cards. A 2/1 for 2, Afterlife 1. That alone has sold me in an Orzhov build. I'm happy with that. Now, the ability is interesting. Many times in your limited game, it might not matter all that much, honestly. Your opponent will want to do something on your turn, I'm sure at some point. They may have to pay more for it, and that could be annoying, and it actually could make a difference. But this is best against an Azorius deck, and I do think that there are times where you might actually try to pull this out of your sideboard if you're not main decking it for whatever reason to try to deal with an Azorius strategy. So if there's a real strong strategy sitting across from you that's using a lot of counter magic, removal spells that are instants, things like that, this could be pretty helpful. And even if white isn't one of my core colors, it's splashable, so something to think about when it comes to sideboard strategies. Twilight Panther. Okay, it's a white card that you have to pay black to give it Death Touch to end a turn, but it's real cheap, just 1 white, 1/2, only 1 black to activate it. So it does fit into the Orzhov plan again, where Death Touch is going to be better there than anywhere else. Because again, your opponent's got some tough choices. And you know what? You can attack with this. You can turn this on at any time, so you don't have to turn it on until your opponent decides to block it. That brings some added economy to the card, and yeah, again, it's just that death by 1,000 cuts that Orzhov wants to do. Okay, let's look at the gold cards now, beginning with Basilica Bellhaunt. The casting cost is demanding here, 2 white, 2 black, so it's not very splashable, but it's good in Orzhov. Very sizable creature compared to many that we've seen so far, 3/4. And when it enters the battlefield, an opponent has to discard a card, and you gain 3 life, so it brings that attrition into play. Opponent has to ditch a card, you gain 3 life, again perfect for the Orzhov strategy. Ethereal Absolution, okay, this one is a rare, you're not going to see it all the time. It costs 6, but wow, is this a good card. It's hard to say that this is going to come into play and do nothing either, because if you have creatures or your opponent has creatures, it's going to do something. So that's kind of nice. Now, all your creatures get +1/+1. Obviously, that's going to feel good if you have a lot of Afterlife tokens, right? Secondly, your opponent's creatures get -1/-1. It just plays into that attrition element again. And beyond that, your opponent might have some creatures that die to this, or I'm sure they'll have creatures in the graveyard at this point anyway when you play it. And you can pay 4 mana to take that creature out of the graveyard, which again kind of whittles into any options they might have later when it comes to graveyard interactions. And it gives you another 1/1 flying token, which of course will be a 2/2 flying token. Awesome mana sink there as well for a drawn out game. This thing is a bomb. Yes, it is dual color, but I will first pick this and be real happy with it. I'll try to draft Orzhov if I get this, but it's splashable. I can splash this into other color combinations too. Final Payment. This is premium removal at common. Pay attention to this one. 2 casting cost. It is 2 different colors, sure, Orzhov colors. Instant. Destroy target creature. So what's the drawback? Well, you have to do something bad to yourself. You either have to pay 5 life, sacrifice a creature, or enchantment. That's a lot of options. I can guarantee you most of the time, one of those options is not going to be all that bad, right? You might have gained a lot of life playing Orzhov, and the 5 life is no big deal. You might want to sacrifice a creature because it has Afterlife or something like that. Or you might have an obsolete creature anyway that's not doing much. Perhaps you splashed a little red for a threaten effect and you took an opponent's creature. You might have an enchantment that's not doing anything for you right at that moment. In some packs of draft, I might consider first picking this. I realize it's 2 different colors. Again, it is splashable too. Also, this is a way to pay life if you're playing Font of Agonies, or in the rare instance that you get hit with Captive Audience, this would let you sack it at instant speed. More on that card tomorrow, but today I'll just say this is an awesome common. Grasping Thrall. Okay, another just solid attrition creature here, 3/3 for 5 in the air, so that's pretty good. I like those stats for limited, I'm okay with that. And also, it's going to do a 4-point life swing when it enters the battlefield. Nothing wrong with that for Orzhov at all. Here's a card as well that if you end up going Mardu, maybe could play into a Spectacle activation in the late game. Remember, we already saw Judiciary's Portal in white, so within this color combination, there is a flicker effect at common. Remember that. Impervious Oligarch. Yeah, this one is relatively cheap when it comes to Afterlife. A 2/1 for 2, granted 2 different colors, but it has Vigilance and Afterlife 1. What's not to like? The economy feels really good here, and it's at common. Perfect, again, for the Orzhov strategy. Kaya Orzhov Usurper. Okay, it's a Planeswalker Mythic. This won't show up a lot. And you might look at this card and say, I don't know, it's not very flashy compared to some of the other Planeswalkers we've seen. Is it worth playing? Yes it is. And here's why. Any Planeswalker in Limited is probably going to be good. 3 loyalty for 3, quickly going up to 4. Your opponent's got to deal with this thing. And here's the deal. The -1 isn't going to come into play very often, right? Maybe sometimes. Wonderful if it does, cool. The +1 to the -5 is what this card's all about. You're trying to +1 this to get to the -5, and it works perfectly into what Orzhov's trying to do. The +1 has you exile up to 2 target cards from a graveyard, so that could eat into your opponent's graveyard. That's never bad. And as long as one of those is a creature, you gain 2 life. So, again, gaining life fits into the Orzhov plan, right? Now, maybe your opponent has creatures in the graveyard. At some point, if they don't, there's a good chance you might, because you're trying to kind of play loose with these creatures anyway. You have these Death Touch creatures, you have these Afterlife creatures. Hopefully you got some targets so you can keep gaining life if you need to. The -5, though, is where it's at, and why you would want to hit your opponent's graveyard more so than your own. It creates a relatively large life swing at that point. Again, perfect for what you're trying to do in Orzhov, and it can be backbreaking. The other thing to think about too is that -5 will help with Spectacle too, so again, another crossover card for Mardu perhaps. She's a Planeswalker in the limited environment. You know she's going to be good ultimately. I'd even consider splashing her if I'm not in Orzhov colors. If I'm in white or black, this is still a good card for me just generally, but she's going to be best in Orzhov for sure. It must be the bomb section of the video again. Kaya's Wrath. This time it's a rare though, not a mythic. Little color intensive again, 2 white, 2 black, not easily splashable, but it is a Wrath. Sorcery, destroy all creatures, and you gain life based on how many creatures you control that die that way. So that's actually kind of nice and fits into Orzhov's plan too. Now, Wrath spells, you're going to play these within limited as long as you can swing the casting cost, and you're going to be happy with that. Here's why. If you're ahead and you need to close the door on a game, this draw might not feel great for you. However, if you're behind, this can even things out, catch you up. And when you know this is coming, or you know this is in your deck at least, you can play around it to some degree. Hopefully your opponent will overcommit, and you'll be able to turn the tables. That's why Wraths are amazing, and that's why you will play them, even though sometimes they're not always great draws. Knight of the Last Breath. This is a little expensive at 7, but this card is doing a lot, and it's an uncommon, so you might be able to grab one of these for your Orzhov deck. 4/4, so sizable creature. Pay 3, sack another non-token creature, and it will make one of those spirit tokens, so that's kind of nice. It creates a situation now where creatures that don't have afterlife can still create tokens, and sometimes maybe a creature would just have died anyway, so you have another option here. And when this does die, afterlife 3. 3 flyers in the air? That's actually kind of awesome. So yes, at first glance, it feels expensive at 7, but well worth it. I will play a copy of this in an Orzhov build and be really happy with it. We talked about using some of the sacrifice effects we saw in the black cards along with the threaten effects that you might find in red earlier in the video, but this is an example where you might be able to also have that type of interaction within Mardu colors. Just watch for those opportunities. Mortify. Okay, this one's a reprint, so you probably know how good this card is. 3 casting cost, even if it is 2 on color. Instant, destroy target creature or enchantment, even gives you an extra option in there. Yeah, first pickable, uncommon, probably in a lot of draft packs. Really, really solid removal. Splashable too. Pitiless Pontiff. Wow, you want to talk about an annoying Orzhov card? Like, this is perfect for Orzhov. This really feels to theme. 2 casting cost, 2/2, granted 2 different colors, but still. Pay 1, sack another creature. This thing gains Death Touch and Indestructible till end of turn. Talk about some tough decisions for your opponent. Attack in with this 2/2. Alright, do I block it? Sometimes even trade down because all they gotta do is sack a creature and now this thing is Death Touch Indestructible, or do I just take the 2? Now, granted, if you don't have a lot of board presence, then they might just block the creature and kind of call your bluff, I suppose. But as long as you have some board presence, especially an Afterlife creature or something like that, or another creature that's maybe not doing a whole lot, the threat's always there. So many times they might just take the 2 and eventually that's going to catch up with them against this strategy. And again, like a lot of the cards we talked about today, if the opponent does not want to block it, it could be interesting in a Mardu build as well with Spectacle. And again, don't forget about those red threaten effects that are out there. Seraph of the Scales. Okay, another mythic here. It's a real solid one. First glance, you might say to yourself, okay, 4 casting cost flyer, 4/3. Feels a little fragile, but you know what? It has afterlife too. So if it dies, right? You're still going to have more pressure in the air, and that's perfect for Orzhov. And the abilities are okay. I mean, they make sense for Orzhov, definitely. Death Touch till end of turn for 1 black is fine, but maybe feels a little unnecessary on a 4/3 flyer. Occasionally, though, it could come into play. Vigilance, I think, is decent on this card if you pay the white to give it Vigilance, because now I can attack in with a 4/3, still hold it back, so then if my opponent does want to attack in with a larger creature, I have the option to block and maybe take out that creature and still get the 2 1/1 flyer, so that's kind of nice. A lot of economy here for 4 mana, no doubt. Syndicate Guild Mage. This is a decent Guild Mage, again, especially for the Orzhov strategy. The first ability can protect you against a large creature or just keep the path open to continue with some smaller attacks. Especially good if they have a decent sized flyer, because you want to still be able to get across with those 1/1 flying tokens a lot of the time. Now the second ability is also playing into what Orzhov's trying to do, dealing 2 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. Remember too, some of these white and black cards that are doing direct damage like this, they could fit into a Mardu strategy because again, this will play well with Spectacle as well. Teysa Karlov. Alright, this is the real deal if you're in Orzhov colors for sure. This could be good splashed into other decks too, but let's focus on Orzhov because it's just so good there. A 2/4 for 4. If a creature's dying causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. Perfect for Afterlife, doubling your Afterlife basically. That's incredible. Oh, and by the way, creature tokens you control have Vigilance and Lifelink. That's insane. Now if I open this in pack 1 of a draft, I'm taking it and I'm trying to force Orzhov. If I don't get there, this is still splashable. Now, does it mean I always splash it in other decks? No, I have to have good reason to do it. These abilities have to matter in my build, but sometimes they would. Now, last thing I'll say about this card, yesterday in blue we saw Persistent Petitioners, which, now granted, it's off color, but this is an advisor, so it does actually play with that card. Vizkopa Vampire. This is a good curve-filling hybrid creature. The hybrid mana gives you a little more flexibility, which is nice. Lifelink 3/1. Nothing crazy here. I mean, it's not a flyer, so you do have to consider that, and if it does get stopped on the ground, it doesn't feel like it's doing a whole lot for a lot of builds other than maybe Orzhov, which might care about the lifelink. So I feel like it could be best there. But it's a 3-drop if you need something with a little bit of size and lifelink regardless of what you're doing. I think most of the time, though, outside of Orzhov, it doesn't make your cut. Orzhov, sometimes it might not even make your cut. You could have better things. Here's our first split card, Consecrate and Consume. I'll tell you what, Consecrate's not too exciting in this set because, again, there's not a lot of graveyard interactions. There's some. Maybe you side it in if you're not main decking it for some reason. And again, the hybrid mana does make it flexible, which is nice for a sideboard card. It does cantrip, so that's kind of cool too. Consume, though, this is just good and splashable as a matter of fact. Sorcery speed, target player sacks a creature with the greatest power among the creatures they control, and then you also gain life based on that power. So you're gaining life, of course, perfect for Orzhov again, but could be good in a number of builds. But the other ability is really good too, since they will have to sacrifice one of their highest power creatures. This also gets around hexproof. Occasionally that could come into play. So yeah, definitely, if you can play this, even splash it, I would try to. Revival and Revenge. Okay, here's the rare split card. Now here is one of those graveyard interactions. Revival is going to return target creature card with converted mana cost 3 or less from the graveyard directly to the battlefield. Only costs 2, and its hybrid gives you more flexibility. I actually like that a lot, and it's perfect for Orzhov because, again, you're in a situation where you could be losing creatures with Afterlife. You bring it back, it dies again. It's just a lot of economy. It's good in Rakdos, too, even because they have some aristocrat-style things going on, too, so bringing back a small creature to sack again is not the worst thing in the world either. And like I've been saying a few times in this video, hey, maybe you're just playing Mardu, who knows. Revenge. It's good. It's a little expensive, but it's good and limited. Double your life total. Target opponent loses half their life, rounded up, for 6 mana. It doesn't impact board state, which is a problem if you're still behind anyway, because yes, the life swing's wonderful, but if you're getting beat down every turn, it's not going to do a whole lot for you. Again, it's a good Orzhov card for that strategy, and in a close game, it actually is just strong regardless. It is splashable as well. I do think sometimes Rakdos would appreciate this if they start to fall behind, and again, maybe you're just moving a little bit into Mardu. That brings us to the one artifact, and we talked about this cycle in the first part of the set review, so I'm not going to go into all the details again, but here is the Orzhov Locket. Okay, we'll move into the lands, and we have Godless Shrine. Now, of course, this and the next one are reprints. You're pretty familiar with them, and we discussed them again in the first chapter, so I won't go into the details, but here is your Orzhov Shockland. And here are your Orzhov Guild Gates with both pieces of art. Alright, with that being said, that is part 3. Tomorrow we'll be back, we'll talk a little Rakdos, and then on Wednesday we will finish things up with some Gruul. So until next time, hey, thanks for watching, please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page, as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.